Live from the Washington, D.C. area, all empowered citizens need to know about intelligent use of resources, smart governance, inclusive communities, smart industry, and healthy, thriving urbanization. This is Smart Sustainability, the TV talk about shaping a sustainable future in the digital age with Nicolette DeVidar. Good evening and welcome to Smart Sustainability. Thanks for joining me this Sunday evening, March 1st. It's 6:30 p.m. here on the East Coast. I'm Nicolette DeVidar. The 21st century confronts us with unprecedented challenges, from dealing with climate change to urbanization, to enabling a more equitable and truly human way of life across the globe. Calls for ingenuity, creativity, innovation, vision, and most above all, a new way of looking at the world and the human role in it. With challenges come opportunities. And just as the word responsibility suggests, it means nothing less than our ability to respond to the challenges. Every one of us is called to step up and take creative responsibility to shape a sustainable future in the digital, or as I keep calling it, the new human age. This prompts us to review our mindsets, our attitudes, our relationship to and interpretation of success and failures, and the functionality of the structures that have been put in place during the last 100 years. Digitization dissolves boundaries. Coupled with an evolving understanding and call for more meaning and purpose, all of us are given a unique opportunity to bring out what's in you and contribute shaping the world we want to live in. So, is in the digital age everyone a change maker? How can that work? And how can we tap into our inborn entrepreneurial potential to become the change we want to see? This is what we're discussing tonight with these guests. I have Maria Dayton, a Presidential Innovation Fellow who works across government to improve federal services and build trust with citizens. Maria is also a social entrepreneur who has co-founded Transterra Media, an award-winning online marketplace that empowers local voices around the globe and is changing the way the media serves news, making it possible for local stories to be picked up by media around the world. I have Jessica Sun, a software engineer at Capital One, LearnServe alum, and a board member of KAST, which stands for Kids Are Scientists Too. Jessica also holds an elected party position to manage local precinct operations. I have Vimal Kumar, founder of the movement of the Scavenger community, an organization committed to manual scavenging in India. He currently serves as next generation leader at the McCain Institute for International Leadership. And I have Bob Spoer, who is chief entrepreneur for People in Search at Ashoka. He founded Collaboration for Talent to reverse the inequality gap by helping people connect with others over common causes. He also founded LinkedIn Recruiters for Good, which conducts pro bono recruiting for nonprofit, including the White House Presidential Innovation Fellows, Engineers Without Borders, and Ashoka. Thank you so much for all of you to be here on the program. And actually, just to put something in context for our viewers, we have, among our guests here, we really bring different sectors together. So we have the government sector, we have businesses, and we have the social entrepreneur scene. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Awesome
to be here.
So I do want to start with, we talk a lot about change maker. So everyone a change maker, what does that mean? I'm going to ask you that, Bob.
No, thank you. Everyone a change maker is a mindset shift. You know, it's really about a different worldview in a world beset by, constant change and exponential change even, right? We need all people to harness the collective intelligence of everyone. The best ideas come from those closest to the problems. Mm-hmm. And so we need to be able to access those ideas in ways that, fundamentally are missing in our, sort of society that we built for the sort of industrial age. And so everyone a change maker, for us at Ashoka, is a framework for thriving in 21st century. and consists of really reskilling our people, with 4 skills: empathy, sort of cognitive-based
Yes.
empathy for the good of all; new leadership, which means enabling everyone to be a leader; getting the best from everyone, because you'll never know where the best ideas come from; collaborative teamwork and creative teamwork, which of course everyone talks about, but it's actually not well practiced. Collaboration is often seen as unnatural acts, right? And it's very difficult to make things work when you have many different views of things. But it's important to survive in our society. And finally, change making itself. Change making is, maybe I should start with what it's not, right? It's not,
that's a good point.
It's not activism, although activism has its place, and it's not aspirational. A change maker is someone who knows they can make change and that has brought about a change. And typically they see a challenge in their world. They come up with an idea on how to solve it,
right,
rather than turn it over to somebody else. And they form a team, alliances, and they get a result. And the result, we call it your dream, your team, and your changed world. And it could be big or small change, but having brought about a change accesses things that enable you to sort of tap your power for greater good. And we do mean everyone a change maker committed to the good of all.
So it could really cover everything. So it could cover anyone, like in an organization, in your community. It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who founds an enterprise or goes on and does the big change, but it could be smaller ones.
Absolutely. You never know where the challenges arise, and in our world of complexity, it's so important. We all, have a sense of, freedom with social responsibility. That's how we're going to thrive. That's how we're going to make progress. It's not going to be done top down. It's going to be done laterally and organically.
Yes.
And we've seen it happen, and it's great when it does.
Yeah. Jessica, what does change making mean to you?
So change making means enabling those around you to make change with you, to bring in your community through compassion, through care, and most of all, a desire to do good. So change making for me, so I actually am a member of the board director still of a nonprofit called Kids Are Scientists Too. Student driven, volunteer driven. We teach around the country in 9 different states STEM education. So our focus is on interactive STEM. So we believed when we were first founded in 2010 that the narrative around science was about rote memorization, regurgitation, when truly it's about creativity, discovery, innovation, building on the existing vast amount of human knowledge and pursuing that greater pursuit of human knowledge, really. That's really what it is. And so and in addition to that, my mom, when I was around 2011 when I founded this organization, she grew up in the Cultural Revolution in China. And so the one thing she raised us with was, the one thing they can never take away from you is education. So I really wanted to teach and spread this idea of that science is much more than just memorization and regurgitation. And so that was one of the ways I made a change and tried to make a change when I was 16 years old. And that continued on for the next 7 years. And I'm proud to be more of a laid back role now as a member of the board of directors of Kids Are Scientists Too.
So the fire caught on to you, in other words. Now, did you know at the time that this is what you were going to do? In other words, did you burn to do that?
Yes, I absolutely did. So there was this nonprofit that I think is related to Ashoka called LearnServe, led by Scott Reckler.
Yes. Great,
amazing guy. We were basically family friends with him now for all these years, these past 7 years.
Yes.
So LearnServe is what enabled me to start KAST, the organization that told me you can make a change at a 16-year-old, and me and my cohort. I was a 2012 LearnServe member. The first training session I had when I signed up for this venture in DC, I was living in Northern Virginia at the time, was Scott saying to this group of 16-year-olds from across the DMV, what pisses you off, you know? And as a 16-year-old, I'm like, well, my friend said no. But Scott was like, in this society, what are some things you care about? What are your passions this early? Because I want to help you make a change for that.
So strongly passionate. In other words, what makes you mad enough
Yes.
to change.
Exactly, right? And telling that to 16-year-olds and then training them for the next 12 weeks or so on how to actually take that passion and turn it into something productive, telling them you can do it and then teaching them how, was a lesson I will always take with me and I have continued to take in different areas of my life. And I owe that completely to LearnSurf.
Were you afraid when you started out? Thinking like, oh my God, I have this great idea. How do I make it a reality? Or did you think, oh, they're gonna show me and I'm just gonna do it?
No, I mean, it was definitely scary. You're a 16-year-old, you know, you have all these scary adults around you. You're like, oh gosh, that's a lot of responsibility, you know? But it took other adults, another organization like LearnSurf, telling me like, you can do it, this is how. But I think it's definitely scary. I think fear is a natural part of being human and being a child and a young adult too.
Yep.
You kind of get through that by just doing it. By trying, by failing through trial and error, that fear becomes a natural part of your life.
You mentioned an important point, and then we're going to move on to the rest of them, but I do want to pick up right on that point that you just said. You learn trial and error, which really requires a different definition of failure in our vocabulary, so that we get over that of not thinking like, oh, failure is a bad thing. It's actually an essential piece to success and learning. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. One of my favorite quotes is, "The obstacle is the way."
Okay. That's awesome. I'm going to move over to you, Maria. I mean, you founded social entrepreneurships. What was your driving flame? What was change? What does making change mean to you?
I think similar to what Bob said, and that, you know, it just has to start with the grassroots. It has to start with the user. Because for me, you know, I started working in this space more in the election tech arena. So basically like doing citizen eye type monitoring efforts online and things like that. Human rights kind of GPS location and things like that. And you know, for me, it always came back to whose voice isn't being heard, you know, and whose voice isn't integrated into not just our global narratives, but even our local and regional narratives. And how do we get to the point where we can, you know, really not just know what they want on some level, but also how do we learn and create those like knowledge systems to really incorporate the feedback that we're getting, you know, so.
How did you get into whose voice wasn't heard? Like, what was your main driver? Was that like a natural, what I'm getting to is like, how did you get this idea? Was this like your natural calling where you say, I identify with the fact that not everybody's voice is being heard? Or did it look to you as, this is something that's underserved and this is where we're gonna go in? Or how did you, what was the driver of all of this to put this in place?
Yeah, I think it's a desire to sort of, in some ways, right certain systemic inequality in a way that you observe. Like for me, I went from the U.S. into like the United Nations framework, right, where you have this almost elitist institution, where you're meeting people that are a very high social class in some ways from their respective countries, but yet you're working with partnerships and stakeholders that are in a very different situation. And when we were doing kind of NGO mobilization within the UN framework, you just saw that chasm, and whose voices were really, in a sense being heard or being incorporated into what the UN was doing at the time or what the media was presenting. And when I went to Iraq, I always tell the story where I was sitting with a group of Iraqi journalists and at the time, Iran had, basically taken over most of the country, and I was kind of, jabbing them a little bit and saying, you guys didn't do a great job of telling the story because most Americans believe that we won the war. They're unaware of what's happening on the ground. And then they hit back at me pretty hard, and they were like, "Do you think we tell our own story? We don't tell our own story. Like, you tell our story. You tell the story that you want to hear." And that really got it. Was, I mean, it's something that I knew on some level, but it was interesting to get the check and to think at that time about how do you sort of work within a systemic change framework and try to address some of those inequalities, So that's what we were trying to do with the social venture, and in a way what we're trying to do now within the government, but focusing more on the citizen and what does the citizen want, and why isn't the voice of the citizen or the desires of the citizen being integrated into some of what agencies are doing, and then also government-wide. So,
And I think this part, like hearing everybody's voice, is also a huge opportunity, particularly in the digital age, because I don't think ever in history, at least that we know of, has there been a time where we can really use that and make everyone's voice heard, right? I mean, this is a unique opportunity. I keep telling people, and that also means for our audience there, if you want to make a change, there is no excuse at this day and age why you can't. Every voice can be heard, and I think that's really a cool point. But I want to ask you one more question, though. So you had the idea, you discovered there is a need for it. How did you set out making it happen?
I think what we started looking at was, at that time, this would have been in like the early 2000s, kind of in the years leading up to the Arab Spring, and there was a lot of social media. So we're doing these, these big social media campaigns, and Citizen Eye monitoring human rights, governance-related projects across kind of sub-Saharan and Asia and North Africa. And what we were noticing when we were thinking about, like, even the narrative of the Iraq War is, it wasn't social media that was telling that narrative, it was really traditional media. So what we're trying to do is develop a process that was similar to some of the larger media conglomerates like Viacom or Time Warner, and that they take one piece of content and they monetize it in a number of different ways, and then trying to give that ability back to sort of a person on the ground. So basically, a Syrian videographer would be able to monetize a piece of content in 20 different ways across 5 languages. This was kind of the idea. So this is where it was basically trying to think of what are the obstacles to sort of integrating into the traditional media kind of environments, and how do we kind of bridge those gaps,
Vimal, you have a very interesting story as well. Talk about your making change. So tell us a little bit about your movement that you founded.
Yeah, so I would like to start the conversation with the word Jai Bhim. So in my country, Jai Bhim word is for the people, those are oppressed, and standing with the people, standing with the unheard voices, the unheard voices, and trying to get equal rights and justice in my country.
Yep.
So the movement is a movement for sanitation workers, is a movement for scavenger community in India. So this movement is for the social justice, empowerment, and education in the community itself. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you understand by scavengers for our viewers? Because I'm not sure they understand that.
Yeah, so in India, scavengers is not by profession, it's not a job. Its position is on the behalf of the caste. If you're born in a particular caste, then you have to do that job. And I born in the same caste, in the same community. My parents also sanitation workers in India. So the system always try to snatch me into that profession.
When you say snatch you into that profession, how do we envision that?
Means when I try to get education, bullied by the students, bullied by the teachers as well. In school also, teacher don't call me by my name. They always call me, hey, son of a sweeper, come here.
And that's only for that particular caste,
yes,
right?
Only for the particular, because my background was the sanitation background, a particular caste. These are called as bhangi, is a derogatory word in India. So that was my background, that was my identity in the society. And then when you wear the good clothes in India, then you also started to wear good clothes. You also started to speak English. So it's like it's surprising for them in India. And they always, want to see us in a sewage, in a gutter, with the cleaning, all these things. Yeah, but I break that system.
So let me ask you something. If you're basically brought up in a system that doesn't call you by your name, so you're by birth, you're kind of like in that space, what made you think that you could have the power to change it?
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing actually. I was 11-year-old that time, and in my city they just started the satellite TV, the cable TV, and I heard from my friends, there is some cartoon shows and big movies every day in the TV, so I was excited to see that. Then I asked my uncle, I said, I also want to see cartoons, so he said, okay, so go and talk to the cable operator and ask for a connection for them. And I took my friends and I visited the office of the cable operator and said, uncle, I need a a connection at my home.
Yes.
I was so happy that time. They said, no, it's not for you. Get out from here. Then second time again I tried and I took some money and I offered them, okay, we will give you money in advance because people don't trust on poor or the lower class people. They said, okay, you can take money in advance if you want. Then he said, get out from here. I don't want your dirty money. And even I don't want to enter in your dirty area, in your dirty ghetto. Then I got angry and I was so sad actually. I said, why? All cities watching TV. All kids are enjoying cartoon. Why not we?
Right.
So then I decided to do something. And I took my friends in the night and I started to break the wires of the cable operator in the night. Yeah. So I did that, I think, 1 month continuously. And the business of the cable operator was going down every day. Then finally he came to us and said, okay, please don't spoil my business. I'm ready to give you a connection. So we get the cable connection.
So it was persistence.
Yeah.
You went back there.
Yeah. Then I realized, it works. If it's injustice, then we should stand against that, no matter how. And we got the connection and we enjoyed cartoon. Yeah.
But you said a very interesting sentence, or I found it very interesting. So you said, why not us? Now, I imagine when you're brought up in an area where you kind of get this ingrained from, over generations, over centuries really, that you think, well, if you're born there, this is just how it is, this is what the system is. But evidently you asked the question, why not us? So where was this spark of thinking that it's just not right and everyone is equal? Where did this come from?
I think it's on the very first day in my school, actually.
Yes.
Very first day when I entered in the school. So my parents said, okay, see, we are labor class people, okay? We don't have time, to manage your complaints. So you have to manage all the complaints outside of the house. We don't need complaints at our house. If we receive any complaint from your side, we will, take you off from the school and you have to work as a laborer with us. So it's up to you. You have to manage your life alone. So that's why I realized that I have to do that. No one is here. Why I'm waiting for?
So you understood that there's a certain self-responsibility and self-determination. Sounds like you also had an aha moment that if you do it and you were confirmed in your assumption that if you actually are persistent enough to change it, that's going to pay out. You're going to get through, right?
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about what the impact is of the movement.
With that incident?
No, of your movement, the Scavenger Movement today. What is the impact? How does it impact the community today?
First, actually, I start to looking outside for the support. Then I realized people don't believe on us, actually. They don't want to invest on us. So then I started to invest on our own people in the ghettos. So nowadays we have the 5 different community resource centers in 5 different states, and it's fully managed by the community itself. So all sanitation workers, getting support, collecting some money for that, and helping each other. So this is a huge movement now.
Yes.
Yeah.
So with the change-making efforts, let me ask you, so I'm going to go to you, Jessica, here. When you had this idea of changing, the way sort of like kids learn, or kids could be scientists too, and you told your support system about your idea, what you want to do, what was the reaction of the support system? Not LearnServe, but I mean outside of LearnServe, like, communities that were not directly involved with it, friends, parents, family. What was the reaction?
I think I was lucky to be in a situation where my family was relatively supportive. They were like, all right, this is what you're passionate about. Go chase in your free time, And so I did. I definitely did. Whether you're talking, but it's a little different story when you're at a grocery store trying to do a bake sale, trying to fundraise for the organization. It's a little bit of a different story. We're talking to principals of elementary schools, principals of high schools, asking for the club to be started at that high school, or asking for them to accept this supplemental after-school program. And I think when you have those harder conversations, especially as a younger person when I was then, you really have to get across your message, your motivation, and your passion. We had focused very much on interactive science lesson, but we had to prove ourselves. We had to have our first pilot session. Would it work? Would the kids like it? And so there's that pressure too, to perform well before you even have experience.
Is this your experience? I mean, Ashoka deals with changemakers all the time in different projects. Like, what do you tell people if they come up with an idea, and is there some sort of a, you know, sometimes when you're in an environment and you tell your idea and then very often you're going, oh, you're crazy, or you can't do that, or things like that. Is there a key note you would let people know as to how to deal with that?
Well, you know, it's a little bit like sort of improvisational theater, right? You sort of go with the flow, and you know, you recognize that there's going to be resistance all the time, but you persist by what, you know, I mentioned earlier, was sort of empathy and getting an understanding from their perspective, you know, because the change is not the norm for society as something that's even, you know, desired, right? So you have to sort of, I think, overcome that through that sort of empathetic approach and bringing them into the solution and build a team. You know, that's very critical. Because,
I would agree.
You know, getting the right allies versus strong-arming something is so much better. You get far more, you know, new ideas, because ideas also like to sort of recombine and reconstruct and ultimately get to the right place. And so, you know, what we try to do is keep people at the ideal level, because if you really stay at the ideal level, you know, when it gets to the point where a solution can be, you know, found. And these days, of course, you know, things change so fast, the rules can't keep up, right?
Yes,
so
that's right.
You have to have empathy to be able to manage through this. And,
Yes,
and
you
so
do.
as long as you're pursuing that, you know, that's why these skills are so, you know, connected.
So empathy, though, and I think we have to clarify that. So empathy in terms of being able to put yourself in the other person's shoes versus sort of feeling like what's going on there. So in other words, you need to be able. I used to say, like, if you're able to debate the other side, you understand the problem.
That's
if you
right.
can't, then it's an issue.
Exactly. Yeah, and I grew up that way. I would always have to have both sides in my head, you know, to be able to even pass, you know, a conversation with someone. And you know, I think I grew up kind of more as a misfit. And my whole focus is sort of building a world where a misfit would want to belong, and so you know, you have that kind of sense of respect for others' views, and in that kind of back and forth, you know, so it's not necessarily conflict, but it's maybe disagreement. That's where you find the really, you know, great solutions. You know, I grew up. I was the first of my family to go to college. I went to Columbia University, and of course Columbia is famous for its, you know, protests and sit-ins, and I never liked them, so I ran.
You never liked the sit-ins.
The sit-ins. I thought the people were really kind of, you know, a little bit, but, you know, very, very aggressive, and it wasn't my style. So I ran for university senator. And it's at the time of the apartheid.
Hold that thought. We're almost ready to go into the break. When we come back, we continue our conversation about how everyone can be a change maker in the 21st century. This is a huge opportunity. Welcome back to Smart Sustainability. I'm Nicolette DeVidar, and tonight we're talking about everyone a changemaker. Since we're already at 2020, so sort of right at the start of the 21st century, and speed is really picking up, we're going to talk about how you can become a changemaker and what the obstacles are and where the opportunities are. I like to go right back in, coming back to what we spoke in the previous segment. So you mentioned, Bob, that you were considered a misfit. So I want to pick back up right on that one and how you progressed from there.
Well, I was the fifth of 5 children, but by a long shot, I mean 8 years, my next oldest sibling. So I was putting my nose into things everybody always said I didn't belong. I wrote for my Catholic high school newspaper, women shouldn't be priests. Should be priests, I'm sorry. Big difference. In 1978, this is kind of a time when my Catholic high school didn't really like this idea, me telling them what to do. And the same thing happened in Colombia. Apartheid was happening in South Africa. I thought we should do something about it.
Yes.
I put a bill to basically divest with our holdings in companies that did business in South Africa.
Yes.
And the reaction was, you're a student, go back to school. You're not here to dictate policy. And I made a moral argument, and I failed miserably. And then I sort of figured out, okay, I did some research and found, well, if we did this, applications would go up, alumni money would go up, our reputation would
Yes.
go up, our investments would do better,
Right.
and our standing in the world would be better. All those things came true, and we passed the bill. The trustees, took my bill and actually approved it, and was the first big divestment. And this is similar to Vimal, not
Yep.
accepting your place in the world, but having a reason for change, that you can credibly make a difference and put the other person's sort of views in perspective, and you can make it happen.
But both of you also mentioned something that I find interesting and important. So you just mentioned you put it together and you showed them that actually, companies would have better business, investment would get higher returns, etc. So you put the impact right in front of the naysayers, so to speak,
Right.
and say this is what the impact could be. So in other words, you use the business perspective and fed them back their own language that they speak. And it sounds like Vimal did the very similar thing. It's like, you said this is what needs to happen. Is that an essential piece of Changemakers, that if we give the message across, this needs to be in there, or you kind of won't get the message out?
Absolutely, yeah. It's you're dealing with the real world, and there's obviously clash of opinion, clash of views and understanding, and you need to bring that into the equation to really make change happen.
Right.
It's
right.
fundamental, and what Vimal has done is the traditional sort of give them loans, they can start their own business. Well, no, that's not going to work because
Yeah.
no one's going to buy from them. So they need training, and he sort
Right.
of, put it in the perspective, put
This
himself
is-
in the shoes of
Yeah.
the folks involved, as well as the, philanthropists, and
Yes.
he's making progress.
Yeah. Maria, when you founded your social entrepreneurship, what were the biggest obstacles that you faced?
Lord, there was a lot.
I know.
I think I think we pitched probably every single venture capital fund in the United States. I went back and looked at all my rejection letters. I think there was something like emails. There was something like 300, close to 300 rejections. So I think capital was a huge factor, and I think
Yeah.
it still is to a certain extent.
Yes,
It's
it
getting better.
is. Yeah.
But at that time, impact finance was kind of just emerging, and at the time we really didn't even see ourselves as a social venture. We didn't know what that label was. We just knew we wanted to do something interesting that was impactful and that would empower people on the ground. But I think obviously security is a huge issue. It still is a huge issue. We've lost at least almost close to 40 people in our network. Kidnapping. There's a lot of problems, obviously, in conflict zone areas and things like that. I think anytime you're, similar to what Bob was saying earlier, I think anytime you truly work to empower people, like at the grassroots level, you have opposition at almost every level, from local
Yes.
governments to sort of systemic power structures to like established kind of sector politics. Like in the media sector, it's very hard to understand who are the decision makers. So it took us almost probably a year and a half before we even knew what buyers to approach, inside the media sector. We were trying to get them to like buy content from, people in Syria or Iraq. So it took just a long time, very opaque, structures. So yeah, even just communicating what we were doing, was difficult. So
Yeah. that's a great segue into what I want to talk about. And this is kind of like you mentioned, there are different sectors and you have to work through. Now, we're in the 21st century. Digitization changes completely how we work together. We know we need different structures. We know to have a model where everyone is a change maker, we need a different governance to it. So let's talk a little bit about how do we bring the boundaries down so that we can cross-collaborate among the different sectors. So what I'm getting to is really how do we get from the thinking of competition and the fragmented thinking to collaboration and taking the boundaries down? Who wants to take a first step?
You know, I think we really need to listen to communities that have been historically marginalized and really give them a platform to lift up the people in our society that have been historically not listened to. There is a serious power in creating and an effort in creating safe spaces where people can feel like they can speak up. Because I think to bring together ideas from all people, because we are all change makers, we need to do so in a very thoughtful way and ask them, how can we elevate your voices?
Who is we?
That's a great question, right? Who is we?
That's what I'm asking.
Who are the people making these decisions? And I think that is a cross-sector
But does
thing.
it only have to be the decision makers?
No, it doesn't. It's all of us.
What's your take on that?
No, I agree. So, you know, it
Yeah.
doesn't, it is all of us. And,
Yes.
you know, I think the central challenge, at least here in the United States right now, is people, since there's a lack of engagement, lack of possibility, a lack of, you know, ability to change your, you know, your future. And the, you know, so to break these silos down, what we've found is, you know, civil society has a huge role to play. Change making is a great equalizer because it is about creating positive improvement. It's not about, you know, sort of arguing one side or another. It's actually bringing about a significant change of, you know, kind that generates value for people. And I think that's where there's great opportunity, you know, both government and business to learn from civil society and how to execute, you know, large-scale change. You need to tap into the person's purpose, their sense of mutuality, their sense of wanting the better, you know, a better world. You know, engineers got into engineering. It's not an easy job because they want to solve problems. And so the more we can focus on that. And my discovery, I used to work at LinkedIn, was when there's a platform and it has a purpose, like Ancestry.com, where it's very clear, people do the right thing. You know, so the problem with Facebook, it doesn't have a purpose, so it amplifies the voice of negative actors, whereas LinkedIn's kind of like, yeah, it's promotional, it's professional, it's about business. You can kind of see that there's some, you know, play there. I created a site which was only about positive social change, right? And over 2 years, we didn't have a single post. And I didn't give anyone any instructions. Not a single post that was either, you know, highly political or antagonistic. So there's a myth that, you know, the internet or these systems, you know, are just, you know, disinformation vehicles, because it's really about what is our purpose in doing it, and the site has a distinct advantage. And we found, you know, when you share stuff about someone else's project, you get 10 times the engagement than when you share about your own. And so that really works well in a you know, community where we're all sort of going after, you know, positive social change.
Absolutely. Maria, I want to talk to you about, because the work that you're doing right now, we heard about how do we empower the civil society, or how do we engage the citizens, basically. Can you tell us about what's going on? I mean, isn't that part of your work? How do you reach out to, how do you engage citizens?
I mean, I think, you know, across the U.S. government, there's obviously a variety of different ways and efforts that are sort of ongoing. The project that I'm working on is part of the President's Management Agenda. That's what it's called. It basically is ways to make sort of citizen archetypes. So you might say like caregiver, veteran, seeking work, disabled, employment seeker. Like we have all of these archetypes, and then trying to streamline across agencies the experience of those people, basically. So that's
the
kind of
experience with government, or the experience they have in their daily lives.
the experience they have related to those particular things. So if there's a veteran seeking employment,
Right.
mostly around the government. So what are the 7 different agencies that they're interacting with? How do you streamline that process? And more importantly, what is the technological data framework that allows that? And I think that also points back to the question you asked before, which is, how do you break down these silos?
Right.
And sometimes the silos are honestly technological in nature or structural in nature. You have one building here, one building here, or a technical program that's incompatible with another technical program, or software or hardware. So a lot of this integration work has to happen on like a multitude of different levels, on like the reskilling and the retraining, but also on the integration of platforms, data strategy. I mean, a big thing that's ongoing in the US government now is, how you deal with like cloud-based data, like how do you aggregate data?
Yeah.
And it's kind of a boring topic on some level, but it becomes critical when we're saying how do we break down silos, how do we make people work together, how do you get them to outreach to the citizen? If you don't know how that data is going to be aggregated and where it's going to go, you just get paralysis. So.
But that also picks up on what Bob said. It really makes it clear that once we break down the boundaries, you need to have a very specific purpose of why something exists, so collaboration can work.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise you have double efforts. Everyone feels like you're stepping on my toes. Get over in your own little silo where you're from. So purpose, I think, is one of the most important things to really realize, like, why does a certain agency or branch exist? What is the actual purpose? Why does an organization exist? Which is different from mission. We actually had a show on that, but so I think that's important. And then of course the technology is important to make it integrated.
And also how you're dealing with the user. So we follow like a human-centered design approach, but I think if you focus on the user with any of the environments you're talking about or sectors, then it takes you down that process of like, what are the sacred cows that we're sort of debating? And like in the US government, for example, it was always illegal to reach out to citizens.
Yes.
So if you think about that, so if you're designing a whole program around the citizen and yet you can't ask a citizen what they like or ask them about their experience, then obviously you're having a gap there, right? So it's like, how do we bridge those gaps? And that's why I think it's useful to talk about who are your stakeholders, who's your end user, who's your client, who's your customer, whatever terms you want to use, because it forces you intellectually to divide that process out and say, okay, these are the 4 major gaps that we need to sort of address, whether it's technological or training, or sometimes it's just education and training, as people are just unaware.
As a software engineer myself, I thought it was so interesting how you talked about the need for technology and modernization and cloud storage across the government. Because as a software engineer, many of my fellow software engineers are not nearly as invested in politics as perhaps I am or the current news. And within the political space, I found there's not many software engineers. So I think there's this intersection that has not attracted a huge community yet, but is extremely pressing. There are many things going on in the tech industry right now that should have been legislated yesterday. But I also love this emphasis on compassion and care for your fellow human when we approach these types of issues.
Well, it goes both ways, right? Because you're saying that there's things in the private sector that needs to be legislated, but there's also experience from the private sector that needs to be brought into government, like
absolutely,
badly in a way, and which is a lot of what the Obama administration was doing in creating a lot of these different, the PIF program, Presidential Innovation Fellows, 18F, U.S. Digital Service. I mean, there's kind of innovation ecosystems that now exist that are attracting talent, but it's a big job. The government's huge, so
the ability to change. You from government is a challenge both at a personal level and a government level. I was at the forefront of this Presidential Innovation Fellows program. I was brought in. I was working for LinkedIn. I started as Recruiters for Good, and they needed my help to find engineers to solve some of the biggest challenges that government faces, and. The first year they had 9 white men and 1 white woman.
Oh, wow.
And they said, there's no way this thing is going to be successful if we can't, if we continue this way. And I said, well, how are you doing it? And they said, well, we're going all to the right groups, we're posting things, and we're TechCrunch. And I said, are you actually asking people of color, women,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
apply.
Yeah.
Oh no, we can't do that. That's against equal opportunity. We can't do that. So I said, well, listen, I'll volunteer. You can't stop me. I'm just going to volunteer. I'm going to reach out to those groups only and invite them to apply. I don't have any influence over who gets chosen, but I certainly know who to invite from my work. And the next year, 50% were women, like 30% were people of color, and then that group built on that sort of tradition, and the law was signed. But it's just these kinds of things
Right.
that are that's the, as I say, the you know, things changing so fast the rules can't keep up. And
No,
we
that's
really
right.
have to be able to be a change maker in situations.
But that's
which-
also the opportunity, because the
Yeah.
rules can't keep up fast enough. So this is kind of like where the opportunities are and the gap is. What do you see as the biggest challenges or obstacles in kind of bringing the sectors together from your experience?
Yeah, so I should say that as a community member, usually the funding agencies, the big organizations, you know, they usually show the tag. What is the degree? What is the background of this guy? He's from Stanford, he's from Oxford, he's from Columbia, or whatever, you know. It's mean he's expert. If he's not from the, you know, this type of background, means they don't know anything. So usually the organizations come to us as an expert, but they don't even know about the community. They don't know anything about the community. They always come us to teach, you know.
Yeah.
They are not coming, you know, us to learn. But we born there, you know, we know our problems, we know what we need actually, but they always come with their own proposals and projects.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so that I struggle, you know, with this challenge we struggled a lot about that.
So it's a challenge of acceptance and recognition that
Yeah.
someone else can be an expert too, and you should actually ask the people who live there, because this is like who's
Yeah.
targeted the most.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because people don't believe everyone is a change maker.
Yes.
Because they said if you are studied in good university, then only you can become a change maker. You know, if you born in a particular, you know, situations, bad situations, you struggle a lot, you not studied well, you can't be a change maker. But this is not true. You know.
So that's the tunnel vision that we have. That's a big obstacle. Any other obstacles that you want to mention? That kind of like in bringing the sectors together, what's the problem? I can think of culture, for example, but you know,
Yeah.
different speeds is a problem probably.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would say not speaking the language, you know, of each person, and not thinking, not having sort of the problem in mind, and then sort of reverse designing from there in terms of what do we need in order to address the solution, and then sort of, you know, finding the right stakeholders across the different, you know, entities. I mean, I know on the government side, there's just a lot of misunderstanding in the private sector and in other actors around
Like
what's
what-
possible, for example.
What are the biggest misunderstandings that you run into?
I think the misunderstanding in the private sector is that there's a higher level of technical sophistication that there is than there actually is.
Okay.
So, like, just to give you an example, so we had this meeting where we brought in like very high level people from the private sector, all the names that you know, and they kept talking about listening posts, just for example. So if you think in marketing, there's these things where you can like listen inside the internet. The government, that's illegal for the government to do, right? So 90% of their strategies are based on that technology, ad tech, right? So it was interesting to watch them where they would say something and you'd say, well, we can't do that, we can't do that. And then you get to the point where they would just be silent, because they would just be like, well, what do you even do? You know, and then then I think it's once then you get to that point, then you go, okay, no, but there are these things we can do together. You know, it's just maybe not as fancy as what, you know, the private sector might be doing, but things that could still be very impactful, like very simple feedback mechanisms for citizens and things like that, you know.
I think it's also a mindset issue, both at a personal and institutional level.
Yeah.
I know from a business standpoint, you know, they don't see the world as everyone a change maker. They see it still in the context of, you know, we're the ones, you know, dictating and
Business
our
or government?
Business.
Okay.
You know, our you know, thing is to solve a customer problem, versus our thing is we're part of a world of, you know, change makers, and how do we contribute to you know, to make better change. So, for example, in the you know, people side of it, I mean, we need a Copernican revolution, because we have 70% of people disengaged 50% of new hires fail.
Yep.
There's more CEOs named Dave than women. And I think it's something like $11 trillion is being spent on change management. And it's a complete failure because they're not looking at the person. They're not centering around the person. They're centering around their, their business model,
Yes.
their
Yes.
way of doing things, and they
Yes.
can't really change. And so if you
Yeah.
you flipped it to
Yes.
where,
Yes.
let's figure out how to get the person to define what they really
Yes.
want and create systems that help connect them to the opportunities that fit both their purpose, interest, and skills,
Right.
and enable that to happen at a, you're going to be much better world. You're going to have a higher participation of employees. You're going to get greater productivity.
Yep.
And it's not that hard to do. It's not that hard to conceive. It's hard to execute, but it's not that hard to conceive.
Yeah.
And we're already in that world.
Yeah.
Yes, we
but
are.
see, for example, that's what NASA did so effectively. Is exactly what you're saying, right? Is that they went to the citizen and said,
Yeah.
based on their interest and their values, and said, help us find stars and comets and all these things with your own personal telescope.
Asteroids.
And it's transformed the way. In some ways, it was a lesson for the whole U.S. government when they looked at NASA, because this started, I think, over 10 years ago.
Yep.
And it's been really transformational as like an
Yes.
example, and that it
Yes.
really expanded NASA's capacity.
Yeah,
You know?
and exactly. But that's really at the heart of what you mentioned with the Copernican revolution. He changed the worldview. So when we went from geocentric to heliocentric, first we thought, well, at the time, people thought that the sun was orbiting around the Earth, and kind of like in the same way like we think today, but people are orbiting around the businesses, when reality is it's the other way around. So the businesses or organizations have to orbit around the person versus the reverse. So in a way, we do have a Copernican revolution.
Yes, it's a challenging one because
Yes,
people need
it
to
is.
also recognize it themselves,
Yes, it is.
and personal transformation has to come before
Yes.
societal transformation. Google spent $167
Yes.
million over 2 years
Yes.
to diversify its workforce. Not only did it not diversify,
Yes.
it actually got 2 huge lawsuits.
Yeah.
And the thing is that 60% of jobs are filled by employees, referrals. Well, who's making the referral? The person who's in the underrepresented group. Until they change and start connecting with people who are different than them, because we're all connected, there's no excuse not to.
That's
but
right.
they're not doing that, and they're not. And this is the greatest opportunity of our time, is to
Yes.
connect with people that are different.
That's
And
right.
that's where the power of innovation comes from. It doesn't come from me sitting around talking to myself.
Yeah, totally agree. Jessica?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this discussion about bringing in different people, bringing in different backgrounds.
Yes.
But how do we do that? Because there is sometimes a struggle with this idea that I don't have the best idea, but actually the best idea is probably out there somewhere else. And I think that's rooted in compassion towards a fellow human being.
It is, and I think organizations almost have to mandate to hire the opposite skill sets of what they hired before to get that different skill set. Because if you leave it up to the people and they kind of hire all the time, everyone picks the same type of person that you've gone with. That's just the nature of how it works.
Those in positions of power already also need to see that there is value in
Yep.
diversity, true intersectional diversity,
Yep.
that the best ideas are the best ideas from all of us.
Yeah.
And I think they also have to fight through that feeling of being uncomfortable. Because I
Yeah.
think it's easy to say that,
Right.
but if they're not willing to sit with,
Yeah.
I'm uncomfortable now because someone is different, and maybe the meeting will take 7 minutes longer than it normally would if it was all of my friends from Harvard. Like I think even socializing that idea of just like you will be uncomfortable,
Yep.
I think that's also important,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. But this is something I wanted to talk about a little bit about. What kind of traits or qualities do we need to become a change maker? That was a great lead-in.
Yeah, I think for that, no matter what society is thinking about us, okay,
Right.
because our door is open, we are treating people equally. So we are
So
honest
who
on
do
that.
you mean when you say our door is open?
Our doors means our all oppressed people,
Okay.
lower caste people in India. Our doors are
Okay.
open
Yep.
because we are treating the society equally.
Right.
So I decided to do my work, and I met Bob in 2015, which was in India. It's like a GAP, Global Action on Poverty, and in that time I was a little bit uncomfortable in that gathering. There's like more than 100 change makers was there. The first time I joined that gathering, so I was just
Were you
walking.
intimidated?
Sorry.
Were you intimidated?
Yeah, we met there in India that time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in Bob.
Okay.
So I just put a sticker on the name of Bob. I said, okay, let's talk with this Ashoka fellow. What's that? This looks seems big, and he's not an Indian actually. I put that sticker. He's not an Indian, so he's not a bias. He's not a casteist. That's why I wanted to talk to the Bob,
Yeah.
and I reached to the Bob. That was almost the lunchtime, and I asked, and then Bob said, okay, what do you want? He was not even looking at me that time. And I got angry actually that time. And I said, I don't want anything. I just want to tell what I'm doing.
So we're almost out of time. I do want to ask one last question, but we have to make it quick. Like if someone has an idea and wants to be a change maker, what's the one word of advice you would give them?
I think be tenacious, and
Okay.
just, especially if you're from a minority group, you have to be tenacious.
What about you, Vimal?
I think I would invite to my home first. First know and understand us,
Okay.
then talk about change.
Okay.
You start with an idea that something you observe, that you're not happy with, just as Jessica said, what are you mad at? What do you want to really get different, make a difference? Because if it's not connected to your own personal story, it won't be as effective.
That's very true. What about you?
To me, that would be righteousness. Remember the motives and passions behind what you're doing and go for it.
That's great. Thank you so much for watching and joining us tonight. This was Smart Sustainability. We hope you join us next week and you become a change maker. Now's the time. Good night.